light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome, I'm Sister Who. I tend to be very passionate about my opinions and what I believe in. It doesn't stop me from respecting other people who have different opinions. I hope that me being passionate about my opinion doesn't convey to anyone that they don't have just as much right to be passionate about their opinion, and that we can each be passionate about what we believe in whatever ways we like. But the concern I wanted to address in today's show is the ways in which people have a tendency to put their identity outside of themselves. I am who I am, and various political or social or educational or societal causes may come along. You know, it may be everything from Save the Whales to a movement to encourage people to read more books and patronize their libraries, to racial causes, political causes. There are so many different ones to pick from. The point, though, that I'm wanting to make within this show is that we need to remember who we are in the midst of all that, and pick the ones that seem most in line with our own heart's calling. And even while we are passionately involved in them for whatever period of time, because I've been involved in a number of different causes throughout my life at different times. They kind of run their course, and sometimes they succeed and sometimes they fail, but I'm glad to have participated in each one, but they're not the sort of thing that's sufficient to build my long-term identity around. For some people, though, those kinds of passionate involvements become almost like a vocation. They may be fighting for world peace for 20 or 30 years until they really don't know who they are unless they're involved in that activity. I suppose in some ways it might be similar to someone who engages in military service, that for a time, for any of a variety of reasons, they chose to enlist in a particular branch of the military, and they learned and lived a military life. And then when it's over, they go home, and it becomes the challenge of learning how to live a civilian life and how to remember who they are outside of that very defined framework and pattern that they embraced for so long. Whether the military person knows how to be a civilian, whether the person who knows how to do war still remembers how to do peace. This is kind of an odd example, but the one that keeps popping into my mind is when I was in graduate school. And it was so intense from start to finish for 2.5 years getting my master's degree in theological studies that I got there the first day, and we got a stack of books and stack of assignments and do all this in the next 2 days, and trying to adjust to professors and demands and assignments and starting to write papers and learning new forms for academic papers and all sorts of things. And it was so intense that I hardly had any time to think about what I was doing for the 2.5 years of the degree. And then when after about 2 years actually, because I finished the coursework a little bit before graduation. After about 2 years, we suddenly got to the end of one particular class session on a Wednesday, and the professor said thank you, and everybody closed their books and started getting up, and I looked down at the book in front of me that was now closed and realized that that was the last class. It was over. And I sat there for a moment trying to think of what am I supposed to do next, because everything had been so prescribed and so directed and such a blind rush to try to satisfy all the demands coming at me that for a couple weeks, I had to remember what it was like not to be in graduate school. And, the same with a political or social cause, that there's a certain time frame, and, maybe it comes to a particular vote, and once that vote is done, then you have to decide what to do next. And everything that shaped and defined your daily life is suddenly gone. And that served as a reminder of, this perennial question: where did I put my identity? Had I put my identity so much into being a graduate student that I didn't know how to be anything else? Or did I now know how to return to the outside world, the world outside of academia, outside of the classroom, and figure out something to do with all of this experience and understanding that I'd accumulated in 2.5 years of very intense reading and coursework. And in a sense it was like starting over, but it was starting over at a very different place. The ideal, I suppose, would be to maintain sufficient awareness of who and what one is throughout the process, and to have a process that did not require a person to forget those things. When I was speaking with one of the professors toward the end there, and they wanted to take pride in how they had created this graduate level, this master's degree person, and I said, no, it really wasn't intellectually challenging so much as it was logistically challenging. I really didn't feel challenged by any of the ideas presented to me throughout graduate school, because in so many ways I had already contemplated and thought about those things growing up as a gay man who didn't know he was gay, and an autistic man who didn't know that he was autistic. There are so many details and challenges that came with that, specifically because I didn't know, and I was trying to figure it out, but for the longest time I couldn't, that I had noticed all these other things about life that most other people were overlooking. And so when I went through graduate school, we got to the end, and I was talking with my faculty advisor, and we were trying very hard to think of anything I had learned in graduate school that I did not know before graduate school. And we couldn't come up with a single thing. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm saying that to point out that graduate school is a very particular parallel universe, you might say. But it doesn't necessarily require intelligence, and it doesn't necessarily accomplish learning. It's a regimented system of papers and approvals and interactions with professors and other students. And does anyone actually learn something that they didn't know through that process? I imagine there must have been a lot of students who did. I just wasn't one of them. And I'm not trying to say I'm more special or more intelligent. It was just everything in my experience being brought to that, and everything they presented to me. But then when I left, I don't know if they weren't listening or if I wasn't listening or what happened, but somehow putting my identity in being a graduate student would have been a big mistake, because from a certain perspective there was nothing there. It was a system. It was a sequence of requirements to satisfy. Somewhere behind and beyond all of that, we have to come back to the basic question of, yes, but who am I? And as I'm going through this, who am I becoming? And I don't think it's so much that I learned anything in their classes or I learned anything about theology that I hadn't known. It was more the difference in me and who I became by going through that process. And I don't know in that sense that they could really take credit for anything they taught me, as much as that they created something really, really difficult that, because of its difficulty, because of its intensity, it did shape me. It did create some sort of maturity, I suppose. I recall reading a quote recently, I think it was attributed to Winston Churchill, something about The mountains are we may measure our accomplishments by the mountains or something, but it was something to the effect that it's the valleys, the dark, difficult valleys, that create depth and maturity in a person. That it deepens us, and it doesn't so much inspire and elevate us as it deepens us, so that there is more to us than there was before. I know at the very least that I am not the person I was before I went through graduate school. So in that sense, did they teach me something? Well, if they did, I don't think they know what they taught me. And I'm not sure if I could name it either. But it was definitely a formative sort of experience. There were a lot of causes presented to me within that time period, though. Whether I wanted to champion civil rights issues or political issues or societal evolution issues or the evolution of church kind of issues. The ways that the practice of religion is forever evolving and changing throughout time as people change. And the way that governments change because of how people change. And the way that people change because of how their government has changed. All of these things become something outside of ourselves that can serve as a reminder to look within. That what it still comes back to is, yes, but who am I in the midst of this? When I first, to go back to the very, very beginnings of Sister Who, through a very complicated series of circumstances, I wound up a bodybuilder at the 1990 International Gay Games in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. And that was shortly after discovering myself as a gay man, and the reason I thought I went there was to find out what it meant to be gay, because I knew I was different from the time I was 4. I finally figured out that it was something called gay, but I didn't know what it meant to be gay. And so I thought I needed to talk to other gays and lesbians about what does it mean. And then when I heard about the Gay Games, it was this incredible opportunity to meet gay and lesbian people from every country around the world. And kind of do my own informal study of what's it like where you live, and what's it like where you live. And I did a lot of that during the 8 days I was there. I got into so many deep conversations. My now former life partner who was there with me just shook his head in amazement. He couldn't figure out how it was that he turned his back for 2 minutes and came back and I was having a deep discussion with somebody. And somehow it just always gravitated that direction so quickly. And among the rest was this eccentric guerrilla street theater group called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I guess their major claim to fame is that they did the first ever AIDS-related fundraiser in the world. It was a dog show for the San Francisco Kaposi Sarcoma Foundation, and it was hosted by Shirley MacLaine, the actress, since she happened to be going through the neighborhood at the time. But they did the first AIDS-related fundraiser, and they did the first safer sex education, a little pamphlet called Play Fair. And so, yes, they were a genuinely good group, but they also did a lot of aggressive political activism. And it was through meeting them, and especially through meeting Sister X. Originally, Sister X went by the name of Sister Explosion, but later changed it to Sister Ecstasy Marie Colette. Sister X was, among other things, a Cree Indian and a professional photographer. And as we're having these various conversations, and it was Sister X, in fact, who gave me my name of Sister Who Does She Think She Is? Because I was recounting one more time of how growing up, knowing I was different but not knowing what I was, it's like my whole life was one big identity crisis. And so Sister X decided that I should be Sister Who Does She Think She Is? And of course the deeper side of that is that it changes throughout life, and how we define ourselves to ourselves has so much to do with how we express ourselves to the world. The thing that became problematic, even in the first couple years of being Sister Who, though, was that the sisters were largely oriented to AIDS fundraisers, safer sex education, and political activism. And I didn't really feel my calling was in the direction of aggressive political activism. I couldn't put my identity in that. I suppose you could say I couldn't find my identity in that. When I looked in the mirror at Sister Who and tried to figure out who I was in the deepest part of my being, what I found was much more individuality and spirituality. And recognizing or accepting those as my deeper, truer life's calling, spiritual calling, I wrestled with the way I was diverging from the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And some of them complained I wasn't radical enough, and I kind of rolled my eyes and said, well, we all have our jobs to do. I just don't feel that that's my job. The problem, I guess, I saw with not the way they were doing political causes, but with political causes in general, is that they're always changing. And if you put your identity into a particular political cause, once you've accomplished that, you then have no identity and you have to reinvent yourself all over again. I didn't see Sister Who being a character that I would reinvent over and over and over and over. And so I said, okay, what's underneath it? What's the next layer? As we peel off the layers of an onion, what's the next layer down? What's inside that? And what's inside that? And what's even inside that? Going deeper and deeper into who I am at the core of my being. And what I found was a spiritual awareness and a spiritual dedication. And I suppose you could say a dedication to spiritual service. That what I wanted most to serve was the personal and spiritual growth of others, regardless of what political cause or social cause or medical cause or environmental cause, regardless of what cause and in which anyone was involved. Spirituality is a thread that runs through all of it, because it has to do with understanding or reaching for a deeper understanding of life itself. That if the government were to change to a completely different form of government, I would still be focused on spirituality. And if a cure for AIDS were to be found and AIDS eradicated so that there were no people left on earth that had AIDS or HIV, that it was all completely cured, that would be so incredibly amazing and wonderful. And I guess you could say it's one of the problems of success, that if, the same with the GLBT population campaigning for civil rights. What happens when you get them all? Will you still know who you are, or will you have put so much of your identity into struggling for civil rights that once they're all granted, there won't be anything left for you to do? And that's where it comes back to looking at the face in the mirror and realizing, or taking the time to explore and reach for what is at the core of that person, what makes him or her the unique individual that he or she is. The causes are an expression. They're a way of showing conviction and passion, a way of engaging with life in a way that is dynamic and conscientious of communal concerns, a way of expressing love to those around us. And they're all very, very good. But it's not where identity belongs. Identity belongs within ourselves. My identity was not within being part of the gay games. It was not within being part of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I suppose to some extent I am inclined to think that my identity is partially within being Sister Who, because after 25 years or so, I'm not sure I would know how to be who I am without it. Without this work, without this other part of me. But I don't see Sister Who as separate from me as much as that Sister Who is a lens through which my best qualities come out. So that when I'm in ritual garb, Sister Who is on the outside, and when I'm not in ritual garb, Sister Who is on the inside. But it's all part of me. The causes in which I involve myself, the causes I embrace, the social, political, environmental works in which I participate are really momentary expressions of the values held by the deeper consciousness and person within. And whether it is this cause now and that cause later, if you want to know who I am, you would have to look at what do the causes have in common. What is the common thread running through all of that? Because it's those common threads that begin to tell us who we really are. When we try to put our identity in the surface instead of the common thread, metaphorically we wind up with an empty garden hose. It has no water of life in it. It's a long tube, but it's filled with nothing but air. A hose is something you can point at a fire, though. A cause is something you can point at a need. But to make it work, to make it live, you have to have a real person on the inside. If you have a person who doesn't know who he or she is, they can get involved in a political cause, but they will expect the cause to drive their action and their thoughts. And if the cause doesn't, or if somebody in the administration misses a step or something, suddenly you will have a person who doesn't know who they are or what they're supposed to do next. They won't be able to generate what fills the hose. They won't be able to generate the water of life. They won't be able to figure out what to do next when a particular step is reached. In reaching for filling the inner part of ourselves, being a sort of me inside of the cause. Me being me, you being you, each of us being the self inside of the cause. The cause takes on wings and broadens its focus and understands how this particular cause is not disconnected from all the other causes. That there may be a cause to ban fracking because of the way it poisons groundwater, and there may be someone else who's working on conserving water because there just isn't enough of it to go around in the more desert climate regions of the United States. And the two of them may find that they have something in common and collaborate, in basically in defense of there being drinkable water in the future. That at some point, hopefully humanity will learn that we can't eat money, we can't drink computer programs. There are some basic needs that even if the power goes out and all the computers stop working, we still need these things in order to survive, in order to go on. If we were to make it so broad as to say, I support the cause of life, that becomes rather complex and a little bit too general to even address. But it is certainly a unifying kind of anthem one might propose. The engagement with life, though, is not so much grabbing the poster slogan of I support life, but introducing oneself to the examples of life that one encounters, dialoguing with those examples enough to figure out what they need, what is lacking, and then sharing whatever is lacking in one's own life, and finding symbiotic relationships to take us beyond the current moment of simply talking about it, to finding symbiotic relationships that make a sustainable, ongoing world in which life continues to reinvent itself and to renew itself. Communities who don't renew themselves ultimately become a source of death and limitation to everyone who lives within them, making things smaller and more limited and with no place to go, nothing new to become. When the job is done, and there's nothing left to do except stagnate and die. In order to live, in order to be vibrant and beautiful and ever expanding, there has to be renewal. There has to be children and grandchildren. There has to be another generation. We can't let this be the last generation. because each generation has so much potential for creating yet more beauty and yet more music and yet more dancing and singing and accomplishments of all sorts, inventions and architecture and ways of living. It needs to go on because it's beautiful and because the beauty of future generations deserves as much of a chance as the current generation was given for its beauty and inventiveness and creativity. As we have received, so we must also give, because there were others who received and gave to us, giving what we've been able to create to the next generation, and hoping that they will say that we did well, hoping that they will say thank you, instead of wishing that somebody would have stopped us from doing terrible things. As an individual consciousness, what we can do is amazing. So, I guess in closing, I'd like to offer this as a blessing. And now may you be blessed with love and peace in the pursuit of your own dreams and in all your dealings with the diversity of humanity around you. Amen. Thank you for watching.